You know what's hilarious is I've been trying to record a video to talk about the generational divides. And I'm realizing just how distinctly I am divided into a generation by how little patience I have for this process. I applaud you, Gen Zers, who spend the time recording and planning and editing these videos that you make, because I I consume the media like so many of you, probably not as much as you guys do. Just it's, I like cable TV still and Facebook. But like this is very difficult at times for me to even like really find the patience to persist with. I certainly, I'm not going to try all these fancy filters or weird edits, but here I am because I wanted to talk about something I've just been thinking about a lot. Something I actually was watching on a YouTube video last night. I've been trying to get back into YouTube a little bit more because it feels like younger people, especially, have been sort of gravitating to that most often, at least from my outside perception. And I'm noticing a lot more long form content, which has certainly been there this whole time, but it felt for a while that like the world was just going straight up to, Snapchats, TikToks, things like that, which I love those too. But I do find myself feeling quite like ADD all the time, trying to sort of keep up with that way of navigating media. So I was watching this maker last night, who made a video about the divide, particularly between Gen X and Gen Z, and just how recently like Gen Xers have been like coming for Gen Zers. It was really funny actually, and I'll try and post a link if I can figure out how to do that. I'm acting naive, but I know how to do that. But they were pretty funny because it was like a bunch of videos they were showing from TikTok in particular of like people, Gen Xers, being like, we will rise, like you've poked the bear, and Gen Xers are gonna come for you now. And I just think that's hilarious. And also, like, for the love of God, my fellow Gen Xers, please stop doing that. It's really embarrassing. Like, you know how people mock boomers? I'm just saying. Like, ooh, it's a little cringe, okay? Just a skosh. And this very well could be also be perceived as cringe, and I'm all right with that. I feel okay in who I am as a person. But I love people. I do. Like, they make me crazy, but I am so interested in them and always have been. This is like deep in my mana, is just this keen interest in how people work, and like wanting to make the world a better place, wanting to make particularly people feel more at ease with who they are and how they work, because I think so many things that happen in our society, so many of the schisms that we encounter, are really a lack of personal understanding, a lack of social understanding, a lack of within people of empathy and compassion for and consideration for the realities that we all go through. But so particularly with respect to the generational divides, and I can speak only as the Gen Xer that I am, I think it's become really problematic. Or basically, I'm actually looking, it's not even that it's become this way. It's always kind of been this way. Like, when I was a little kid, my mom and I would watch Bye Bye Birdie, which is a movie that was made in the 1960s of like a Broadway musical that was from even before that, I think slightly before that. And there's a song in it. And, I love this movie, but I don't know if people would be into it. But I did. I love this movie. Anne Margaret in that movie, side note, is a hot tamale. Totally worth watching it just for her performances. And I'm pretty sure Elvis is in the movie too, which is kind of interesting. But there's a song in there that, and the movie is mostly takes place and is like focusing on the lives of these young people, like teenagers in high school, all played by like 20-year-olds, side note, which is hilarious in itself. But there's a scene where like the dad of the young teenage girl in the movie is like talking about just like how like kids are just beyond these days. And it's like, the song is "Kids, what's wrong with these kids today?" And I think of that song all the time when I hear an older generation speaking about a younger one in a divisive or derisive way, when they're going, like, God, young people today are fill in the blank. And I could act like I have never made statements sort of to that end, but that would be a lie. If I'm frank, I have certainly felt that internally, and I'm pretty sure I have also articulated things that reflected that sentiment as well, right? Like, I'm pretty sure I've said things that were not really nice about younger generations, and not hateful, but just like perceiving them as like, oh God, like eye roll, And so I do understand why people go there, and I understand what goes on inside of me when I am interacting with young people, where I find myself kind of going like, ugh, ugh. I'm kind of like, it's like being, a cat that's being pet the wrong direction, like it's just like, ugh, God, you're making me like, ugh. And yet I am a human being who is constantly seeking to evolve. I want to be better. I don't want to perceive young people this way because, one, it's just not healthy, but also it's not really fair. In reality, like, I think sometimes when I'm perceiving things that way, then I'm forgetting what it was like to be a young person. And I do remember what it was like to be a young person. Like, I was in my 20s before. Like, I think that's sometimes what younger people are encountering in older people is they're feeling, the older person's feeling like I do know what it's like to be you, and you're thinking that I don't. And that sort of chafes on us. Whether or not that's always what occurs, I think sometimes that is what's happening, is just the older person's going like, okay, like, okay, little kid. And that's unfortunate on many fronts because, one, it doesn't allow a young person to be respected for where they are in their own personal evolution. In reality, like, I remember when I was in my 20s, the kinds of conversations I would have with people in their 40s, the things they said to me and the way I would almost eye roll at them, the way I felt misperceived and that I was being patronized too. And I don't want that experience for them. But now in a weird way, it's like I'm on the other end and I actually understand why they were acting in that way. And so I guess there's part of me that just wants like both of these worlds to understand the other, or to at least remind one another that like we're each going through these parts of our own personal evolution. And for the young person, my memory of being in my 20s, which was in the late 90s and early 2000s, right? Like, I was in college and I was learning new things, and I was very passionate, and so I would get into these large arguments with people, and they didn't know what they were talking about, and they were so out of touch. I remember constantly being told how loud I was. I was just loud, and granted, I am loud, like compared to the average person in the population. Like, my voice is generally louder, but I've actually noticed in the last few decades how my volume has gone down and down and down, and that now when I encounter younger people, that I perceive them as incredibly loud, and it almost makes me laugh because I remember being so resentful of being given that sort of feedback. And like, I'm educated in psychology, like many people. And it's weird how many people are educated in psychology and they still forget these principles. So maybe get a little refresher on that if you consider yourself somebody who has a degree or expertise in that. Anywho, I know how development works, right? And like, in reality, like when you're young, that is very normative for you to feel impassioned, to be learning these new things and finding this new sense of autonomous self, because you're literally coming out of formative years of your life where you're living with parents who are telling you what to do, and you're going to school and they're telling you what to do, and even your peer groups are still, I mean, if I'm honest, even in your 20s, they're still bleeding quite heavily into telling you what to do, one way or another, whether it's overt or just sort of peer pressure. But as you get older, you start to find more and more personal autonomy, and that's life changing. But it is funny because you forget that when you were young, you didn't have any of that. And I think with young people, they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what the way they're going to look at themselves 20 years from that time. And that's okay. They should be living being 20, right? And the problem with an older generation talking about younger people is we're sitting around expecting them to be like us, but they couldn't possibly be like us, because a lot of what informs how we are is all the years between the time we were 20 and now. So like, why are you expecting them to think and feel and act like you now when they don't have any of that life education that happened. And in truth, I don't even know that that's wholly what's happening when a Gen Zer, for instance, encounters a Gen Xer who's like, or a boomer is like, you know. I think in reality, sometimes it's just like the older person just doesn't have a lot of patience for things that are inherent to sort of that age, which on some fronts is being, if I'm honest, like when you're young, you're pretty pedantic. Like, I know it's funny that like young people will say that old people talk down to them and they're always telling them what to do. But the reality is actually a lot of times young people are coming to you also with an attitude of sort of like, of course I know everything. Like how, ugh, I can't, how dare you talk to me like this? Oh my God, you're so out of touch, and it's like, okay, like the older person's going like, okay, calm down. Like I put in the hard yards. Like maybe sometimes I might actually know what I'm talking about when it is in reference to me or things that are important to my generation. Like maybe I do know things as well. It's like, just as the young person doesn't want to be patronized to, neither does the old person. Okay. Like, and the reality is when someone is 20 years your junior, they are like a child to you on some fronts. Just that's the reality. As a person in my 40s, most of my peers, their children are now in college. Like these are children to me. And I don't want to talk to a 20-year-old like they're a child. I don't have a child myself. So I don't, I'm not trying to be patronizing to them, but also like, please don't speak to me either like I am out of touch, because that's a misperception of really where I'm coming from too. And so it is a mutual thing that's occurring, but I definitely think sometimes the onus is on the older individual who has access to greater wisdom and experience to maybe like curtail those compulsions inside of us, the like little parts of us that are needled by the behaviors of young people, like for us to just chill out and just remember who we are. Like I remember once, perfect example, when I was a nanny, I remember being in this conversation with actually it wasn't even a nanny, I was working in a school and I'm out in the play yard, and I can't remember the conversation I was having, but it kind of generally went like this, with this like literally like a kindergartner. And the kindergartner's like, the sky is purple. And I was like, no, hun, it's blue. Like I'm looking at it, it's blue. And the kid's like, no, it's purple. And I go back and forth with this kid for like, I don't know, 3-4 times, no, it's blue. Like science says, and I'm doing all this work. Right. And then I realized like, wait a second, like, I don't need to prove this to this child right now. Like, is this perception of this child, is this harmful to them? Not really. Like, over time, they're going to learn the science and all the things that I might have learned later on as to why the sky is blue. And, like, maybe they don't know their colors yet or whatever. Like, do I need to have this dogged fight with this little kid to, like, prove something to them about me? I don't need to prove something to this person. I don't need to prove myself to anyone. That's kind of one of the wonderful, beautiful rewards of getting older. One of the few, because the rest are just like pain and gray hair, but and glasses. But you know what I'm saying? Like, there has to be a part of us as like the older people in that paradigm to like recognize that like we are adults and we don't need to prove something to anyone about us, That said, here I am like trying to prove something. If anything, I'm trying to entreat people who are my peers, my fellow Gen Xers, to like remember ourselves. Like we are good at this, and like we know how to like exist autonomously. We know how to self-soothe and take care of ourselves. And like, why do we get all bent? Like, we don't need to get bent. But I do understand. So then what do I have to say to Gen Z? On the other end of that, and I already can feel like there's probably some Gen Zer who, if they saw this, which they probably won't ever interact with my page, but if they saw this, like are going to be like, well, you sound like you're really just talking down to us. And I'm like, I don't know how to work that out for you. I'm not attempting to, and certainly intent is only half of a statement. Like my intent doesn't count fully for everything. But that said, like, I'm here for it. I'm interested in you, Gen Z. And I'm also interested in what, characteristics you're offering to like the zeitgeist of humanity. Like, I love that there are evolutions in all kinds of things, perceptions particularly around the LGBTQ plus community. For instance, two of my closest friends in high school, who I'm still friends with to this day 30 years later, they were gay, and they were closeted gay when they were in high school. And at the time, and it's so weird, like at the time in the 90s, I thought we had really gotten somewhere. I thought we were already progressed as a society. But these friends, I didn't realize, maybe subconsciously I did, but I didn't realize they were gay. I didn't really know, and they didn't outwardly come out to me until after we were into our 20s. Like, that didn't, because it wasn't a safe place to be. The idea and the notion of non-binary individuals, that wasn't a concept. And I'm glad that these things exist. I'm a person who occupies multiple domains of race, for instance. I'm multiracial, and I understand the sort of issues around identity, the issues around the outside society trying to tell you how to be and who you are. And, how many times I've been told in my life, like, you're not black, by white people, or, whatever the misperceptions, people telling me who I was and how dare you. And I also, I understand even the things around gender, and the struggles with having to, like, being a young girl who was, to be honest, I was very overweight, and so I couldn't even like sort of like wear things. Back then there weren't even stores that were made for young people who were bigger, and so I would wear a lot of like guys' clothes, which I have no issue with. I like pants, and I also like dresses. I like all the things, and that was a challenge for me, to be perceived in certain ways because I was a girl who did well in honors classes, and there are things around that. There are really weird sort of issues in society around women who are more intellectual. They're often perceived as being more masculine. That's a trope that is out there. I think I encountered a lot of things even being a black person in a very white community. Lots of misperceptions about me. And so I really understand that struggle where a society is trying to subject certain sort of tropes and put you in sort of boxes all the time that you don't occupy, and how jarring and that can be. And so, like, I am super excited that young people today are fighting that fight, and that they're really getting the memo on that, and I'm here for it. So, like, just know you're educating me in real time too, and I'm trying to learn, and I'm involving my sense of self, involving my language, to reflect a respect for that, because just as I was a young person who wanted to be understood, I think it's important for me as an older person now in that paradigm to understand young people too. They deserve it. It's part of how we make the world a better place. And if I'm frank, like, generally, I'm around young people a lot. I'm around particularly Gen Zers a lot for my job. Generally, they're actually pretty cool. They're pretty kind and receptive, and accommodating and considerate of other people. Like, I don't encounter the selfishness that unfortunately a lot of millennials were always like derided by, which also wasn't fair and true. Like, none of that was true. But so like, I think there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of reason to like have faith in Zers. And like, I guess I just want Gen Zers to have some patience with us. And I think you do. I mean, ironically, I don't think that you're being incredibly impatient with us. But to just be, consider that sometimes that you might be presenting us with concepts that, while new and fresh to you, they did exist before you encountered them, before you maybe renamed them, or that you're just maybe the end result of processes that have been occurring for multiple generations. And so that sometimes what you might be encountering in older folks is not resistance to what you're bringing to them. It's the way it's being packaged and presented to us, like we don't recognize it. We do recognize the things you're doing because we have experienced them, because we have been here and we have been inside the world that you are now occupying, that you are finding these criticisms of, etc. But that, like, not everything you've observed and feel is an incredible enlightening kind of moment. Not all of those enlightening moments, those are not necessarily new concepts. I guess that's the idea. Is it's just like, there were people who were walking before the running, and I don't think it means that you need to send us a present or a fruit basket or anything like that. It's more like just have patience and understanding that this is a constant process, and that at some point you as a younger person will also be an older person and will be encountering younger people who are going to bring up these same things. They're going to roil up new sorts of issues, but similar ways inside of you one day too. And so you want sort of that compassion and understanding of this idea of each of us is in this process of evolution, and that there's no reason for us to be threatened, or to be at odds with one another, because we're all coexisting in this like one singular biome that is Earth, and one singular society. At the end of the day, it's all just one collective world we're all in. And like, there's zero reason for us to be looking for these additional ways to divide ourselves when there's every need, honestly, to do the opposite and to realize like all of these differences and these unique elements that sometimes are like things that we could be really capitalizing on, and that there's actually a lot of support out there for changing the world in positive ways and for doing these new things. Yeah, I think that's what I want to say.